Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to show you another technique where we can use our embossing folders. Now I'm going to do some double embossing, so I want to use two embossing folders on the same project. Now this creates obvious problems because the second embossing folder that you use is going to take away the impression of the first embossing folder that you used. But I'm going to show you what I do when it comes to double embossing. So I'm going to pick some embossing folders. This is pretty much all I have. I tend not to keep too many on hand at once because I find with all things in my craft space that more choice makes it harder for me to create. So I like to keep it a little bit limited. I'm going to be using this embossing mat, that squishy brown embossing mat, and then just regular cardstock. I use the Franceville, I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's the brand I use from Spotlight. I can get it locally and it is £110, which I use for both card bases and card fronts. Now I have a couple of embossing folders here. I have the kind of brick looking one, and then I have an Altenew one. This is the Bold Floral Designs embossing folder, and I'm going to show you two different techniques and two different ways that I do this today. Now first of all, I'm going to pick two embossing folders, one that has a smaller kind of pattern to it and one that has a more bold pattern. Whichever one is going to be in the background more so is the one that I'm going to emboss first. I'm going to emboss this just regular, and then you can see this creates a gorgeous kind of brick background, brick pattern. And then for this one, I'm not going to do anything else to this before I put it in the second embossing folder. This is the Floral Designs, and I'm going to pop this one through. I'm going to place it and line it up for the flowers that I want to be on the front. And then when I kind of show you this, it's a little bit hard with the lighting that I use for filming, but you can definitely still see that there are bricks there in the background. So even though running through your embossing, the second embossing folder will take away kind of the dimension of the embossing folders, it does not take away the design. Now here is the second way I can go about things, and I have two embossing folders here. These probably weren't the best to pick in hindsight to show you this technique, but I needed these for a really basic card that I was creating, a basic background that I needed to be not too busy. So I'm running this one through. It's just kind of a textured background that you can see it showed up there. And then what I do to bring this out is I take a light ink like Hickory Smoke. This is the Distress Oxide, but any inks are going to work. And then I just have a little makeup sponge or any sponge that is nice and flat that I can gently rub over the pattern to bring forward the pattern a little bit. Now I definitely want to keep this subtle. That's the kind of background that I needed for my card. So I was just going to keep this really, really light. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do take my time to make sure that I don't get really, really big splotches is my goal. And that's why I like using these flat makeup wedges. I find that they apply the ink really nice and smoothly. This one, of course, this is not a 3D embossing folder, so it only has kind of one layer of dimension. This is going to change as to whether you use 3D embossing folders or just normal ones. So just work with what you have. So that is the first layer done, and that makes it so that our first embossing folder is going to remain seen, even though the texture is not going to be quite as dimensional as it would be if you just ran it through once. I put it in the second embossing folder and run that through, and you could either leave it as is, just like this, or you could take a second color of ink like I'm going to do here today, and again, same makeup wedge, and I'm just going to run this over really lightly to bring out the second embossing folder pattern. As I said, this probably wasn't the best one to demonstrate with, so I apologize for that, but at least you get the gist of what I'm doing, so you will be able to try this out with what you have in your stash already. And sometimes it also takes a little bit of practice to find which embossing folders are going to work nicely and layer up nicely together. So it's just a matter of practice and try them out together, see how you go, see whether you like adding ink or you just want a really subtle background. But for this one, I'm going to show you how I finished off this card just quickly. So I am taking my fingered daubers here. I am not even going to re-ink these up. I often do this. I just use what little ink is going to be left because I want this to be a really subtle pattern. So I'm going to do the insides of the flowers here. Then using a finger dauber, I think this has worn lipstick Distress Oxide on it. This is the finger daubers that I just have for my Distress Oxide, and they are rather full at the moment, I must say, but in general I try to keep basically a light and a dark at least for each color family. I certainly don't have a finger dobber for each Distress Oxide. I pretty much just try and keep kind of a light and a dark, and that may, when I come to use a different color, I just rub it off on some scrap paper or anything else that I might use, and then that way I can dip it into the new Distress Oxide, whichever one I'm using for that day. So once I have done, I did a little bit of yellow for the insides, a little bit of pink for the petals, and then a little bit of green for the leaves. I went really light-handed. This is just the background and I want to keep it that way. And you can see if I kind of tilt it in the light, you can see the brick texture is still all through the background. Now this is the Waffle Flower Happy Birthday stamp set, and I have used this one a lot. This is a really good one that I invested in probably more than a year ago now, I would say, and I'm deciding whether I like the top or the bottom script there. I kind of like the idea of the top one, but it just didn't feel quite right. The bottom one felt a little bit too blocky, but I will show you how I made this decision. Now this is what happens when I can't make a decision and I'm really indecisive. So often, remember, when I am editing, I get to edit out the pieces that aren't interesting to you, or that I think I probably just need to skip through. Or sometimes when mistakes happen in things, often I try and leave them in, but sometimes I also edit them out. And this is one of those times when I will show you how indecisive I can be. So I have a piece of Lawn Fawn vellum on the left and a piece of normal cardstock on the right. I have my VersaMark ink pad, which I'm going to stamp once on the vellum, and then stamp in black, the VersaFine Onyx Black on the vellum, and then with the black on the white paper. So I could not make up my mind whether I wanted clear on the vellum, whether I wanted white on the vellum, black on the vellum, or black on the cardstock. So I have done those two with clear embossing powder. The ones with the black, I emboss them with clear. And then the one with the embossing ink, I did with white embossing powder. Then I'm going to melt all of these, and this is when I can kind of get more of an idea and put them on front of my card, lay them down, see what I think of them. This doesn't bother me, and this is definitely not a waste. I have a pile beside me of sentiments and things that I have stamped. If you guys have watched my channel for a little bit, you'll know I often, pretty much always, stamp more than one sentiment if I'm going to cut them out, because often if I don't, I find that's when I mess up, and then having to get everything out again can be disheartening, or time costs me a little bit of time. So what I usually do is stamp a couple and I just cut them out as well, and then put them in my little jar. And then I will use them when I am creating, or often when my daughter is creating. She often creates alongside me. She will happily dip into those and use them as well. And it just means it makes for easier, smoother card making when I am not filming as well. So here I decided to use the white one. I felt like that went the best, but I want to get something that matched a little bit. So I took one of the TriBlends. This is an alcohol marker that has three different colors, three different shades, of the same color. So it's got a light, a medium, and a dark, all in one barrel. So I've done the dark down the bottom, and then I went the light up the top. I think I actually did the medium down the bottom because I wasn't sure quite how dark it was going to be. I didn't want it to be too dark, and I've gone for sort of an ombre. Well, just when I zoom in a little bit here, you can see it, and I'm going to go over the bottom just a little bit more to bring out the ombre, just a teeny bit more. And then I felt like this was kind of softened up those block letters, and I'm going to cut this off to create a nice little strip to go through the center of the card. This trimmer is the same as the Dress My Crafts trimmer. Again, I will link all of the products that are still available in the description box below, just in case you're interested in checking them out or having a look at what they are. So I'm going to trim a little bit off my piece of cardstock here. This was slightly bigger than what I needed, and it gives me a really nice little border. But I did think it needed to stand out just a tiny bit more. So I'm going to do my old trick here where I add the low tack tape so that I can add a border in. And this is instead of matting another layer of cardstock. So you can do whatever works for you, but this just saves me a whole layer of cardstock. So I'm just going to take the Distress Oxide, I think this is Worn Lipstick, and I'm going to go around the edges. This was just a really nice pink that matched the flowers and matched everything else. So I just use a piece of mint tape, which is just a really low-tech tape, and I just pop the same piece along all 4 sides, just enough so that I get a peak of kind of a matting layer, less than, it's probably like 1/16 of an inch or so. I use some Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish, that's the glue that's inside these glue bottles, and I'm going to pop this down onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. And this is about the time when I realized I hadn't put the sentiment on first, which was my plan all along. So I clearly was having one of those card making days, but we can make it work no matter what. So I have popped my card front down, and then this is where I thought, do I want it to go right across the front? I didn't like that look. I was meant to have it only on the matting layer. So I kind of eyeball it and then see where I need to cut it off each side. And then I'm going to, it doesn't look quite right because it cuts through that frame that we created. So never fear, I'm going to do basically the same thing to this. I'm just going to add that little bit of tape. And this will create the same thin border that I have going around my card front as well. Same color, same everything, makes it really easy. And then this way it kind of looks like it should just flow on like it was always meant to be there. I did decide that since I had the opportunity to, that I would pop this up on some foam tape as well, just to give the card a little bit of dimension, because at the moment the only dimension is with the embossing. So I'm going to pop this up with a little bit of foam tape. You can do this either using foam squares, foam dots, foam tape. You can use layers of cardstock if that's what you prefer. Anything here is going to give it a little bit of dimension. And then when I pop it on top, I'm going to do a couple of finishing touches to this card. Now I'm going to add a clear glitter pen. This just adds a really thin layer of a little bit of sparkle, not too much at all, but just a little bit. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of glossy accents to the center of some of the flowers. This also helps the yellow, it also helps the color that you kind of have underneath shine through a little bit more. So I really like the look of a little bit of glossy accents. This goes on a little bit cloudy, but it dries perfectly clear and a little bit dimensional. So this is a fun product, and here is the finished card. It's very hard to show you the second embossing in the background, but it's definitely there. In real life, it's very noticeable, but a little bit hard on camera with the lighting and things. So you can kind of just take my word for it. You can see both of the embossing folders shine through. I hope you found this video useful for today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, bye!